Hi all, and welcome to Data Lens, the short series where we talk about market research in the outdoor hospitality industry. Today, I'm here with Scott Barr, the president of Karen Consulting Group. He has over 35 years of market research experience, and Scott has a wealth of knowledge to share, and I'm here to ask him questions that you want to know. So let's hop in. On today's episode, we'll be talking about using surveys and interviews to gather customer insights. All right, so Scott, let's hop on in.
All right, thanks.
Sure.
So you want to talk about surveys and interviews to get customer insights. This is really a topic that we could spend days on. It's very broad and it's very can be very detailed. But today let's just kind of talk about getting started with it. I think that's the best thing that we could do at this point, because once you get started, you'll find the value and then you'll want to proceed from there. So the whole idea behind gathering insights through a survey or an interview is to get information that you can't get any other way. That's the bottom line. You have information on all your guests. You know how long they stayed, what kind of site they had, number of people in their group, what they stayed in, hopefully the type of, if they came in an RV or a tent or whatever, you know all that information. You know if they're a repeat guest. I'm making some assumptions here, so hopefully you're getting all this already. But so you know some stuff about your guests already. But what you want to know from your guests directly is what they think about the experience, what they think about you, what they think about your park, how they felt about their stay, but in a much more detailed way than, say, a simple guest review. A guest review is something that is primarily there to look at two things. Did they really like it? Did they rate you high or low? And why? And sometimes you may or may not get a good answer to that why as well. By doing a survey or an interview, you now have the opportunity to dig into this topic a little bit more, ask them more information. So, for example, you ask your guests, what did you think of your stay? How would you rate your stay? And they say, good, they liked it. So if they said good and not great, now it's like, well, what made the stay good? What could we have done better? What specific parts of your stay did you like? And also, please rate us, rate our landscaping, rate our staff, rate our service, rate our sites, rate the directions to get here, rate our website. All these things that you don't get from just a review, you can now ask in a survey.
Awesome. No, that's awesome. Great insight, especially when it comes to surveys and kind of gathering that data from a park perspective. What are the best survey techniques for market research?
The best techniques are, in my opinion, to do an online survey, to email someone a link to a survey that you've created or someone has created for you. There are some free tools out there for people to use. You can use Google Forms. You can, SurveyMonkey has a free tool as well. You're somewhat limited in what you can do, but they're free. It's a way for you to get started. It is one of the better ways, simply because it's immediate, it's direct, and people are familiar and comfortable with it. Now, some organizations have used texting, and that's becoming more popular, especially if you have a lot of your guests give you their cell phone number and give you, basically permission to communicate with them. It's actually, texting is a great way to stay in contact with people while they're staying with you. It establishes that dialogue. And you can send the survey link out via the text message. So in that respect, if you're doing that, you tend to keep it a little bit shorter, but And it's also one of those opportunities for you to do it fairly quickly. You can just turn that around, very quickly to your guests. So those are typically the a lot of people are not doing much in terms of like mail surveys anymore, and for a number of reasons. One is it's labor intensive. Online surveys, whether it's text or email, it's not labor intensive. There's easy ways to compile the information too. So the other thing, and we can touch upon it now, is because you mentioned interviews, and here doing interviews with your guests is a really, really strong approach. The downside is that you can't do as many. You're not going to get as much feedback by doing interviews with your guests, because your resources, your time, you and your staff's time, you don't have the time to go out and do a few hundred interviews with your guests. That even if each one only took 15 minutes, and believe me, they take longer than 15 minutes, you're still going to spend a lot of time doing those. So what you do is you pick some guests that maybe they had a really good experience, maybe they had a terrible experience, and then you have a conversation with them. And the best thing you can do is just document it. Don't make it formal. You don't really need a script, but follow up and have a conversation with them. Sometimes you can do this while they're still there, but it doesn't hurt either to wait a week. Give them a call and say, we'd really like to talk to you about your stay. Can you tell us a little bit what you liked most and what you liked least? And again, make it a fairly casual conversation. Document it so that when this person comes back to your campground, you'll have this information. And that's what you want to be able to do, is know stuff like that about your guests. So those two approaches are very sound, very solid, and very accessible. If you have budget and you want to hire someone like us, we're more than happy to do that for you. We have experience, we've done it a lot. But if you want to just get started, again, these are a couple pretty easy ways for you to go out and start gathering some information.
Awesome. No, and we obviously leverage those all the time to get the best quality information. So I guess following up with that, on that same train of thought, with each technique, what would you say is the best, like kind of the advantages and disadvantages of each?
For surveys, your advantages are that you can reach out a large number of people very quickly and easily, that people are comfortable with email typically, though that's not as common as it used to be. But you get very immediate feedback too. The disadvantages are that people are responding less to email surveys. Sometimes there's confusion with the questions. People may not be that comfortable with it. Depending on how you design the survey, sometimes it doesn't always necessarily translate well to, say, a mobile platform versus a PC or laptop, or even like an iPad. But so those are some of the drawbacks. And if you ask too many questions too, people will stop in the middle of it, and if they lose their connection, they're going to complain to you about it. So those are some of the drawbacks. The drawbacks aren't that tremendous. It's a real continues to be a real solid way to communicate. And with the interviews, what you get through the interviews, your biggest advantages there is that it's highly interactive. That is, someone can say something to you that could be completely unexpected. And those are the nuggets that are typically the value in that process. Is someone will say something that you did not anticipate, that it'll be something you didn't know about. It could be good, it could be negative, but you will have information that you didn't have before, and you can follow up and start asking questions about that. And your conversation can go down a path that you didn't anticipate in many cases. You can have a completely different conversation than you thought you were going to have. And that's a good thing. The disadvantage is that, as I mentioned earlier, you can't talk to as many people. Your reach is a little bit more limited. And you don't get information that you can compile and say a certain percentage of your guests said this, a certain percentage said that. Through your interviews, you can't really do that, but with the surveys, you can. You can make some assumptions if you get a good response out of it. So those are really, and again, with the interviews, it's time. There's a lot more time spent doing that, because like I said, if you get someone on the phone and you think it's gonna be 15 minutes, it's gonna be 30. It's because once people start talking about this stuff, they won't stop. And so those are the pluses and minuses of both of those approaches.
Awesome. So essentially it's quantity over quality, but you can still get a good amount of quality through a quantitative survey, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like, and sometimes you can do a hybrid. And we're, in fact, we're working on a project right now where we're doing that. What we're going to do is send a survey out to some people. And at the end of the survey, we're going to ask them if they'll participate in an interview. And so now what we're going to have is survey results, and then be able to get into detail with a select group of people from the survey and have a conversation with them and dig into some of the topics.
Awesome. And actually, speaking of that same train of thought, do you have a quick example that you kind of take us through where you really had, like, say, a quantitative study, and then you really brought it to qualitative and really brought the project together and made it sing?
I think in this case, what I would do is kind of reverse it and do the qualitative first, because especially if you've never done a lot of research before, to have the conversations with the people that have stayed with you, again, a select group, because those conversations may lead you in a direction that will help you design your questionnaire. If something comes up, say someone brings up something about your campground layout, what you can do now is include that item on your survey and ask a broader audience about it and see if it is indeed an issue or it was just a one-off. The same thing with any topic. Someone could say, I liked the food overall was great, except for, think of it as a restaurant, except the appetizer in particular wasn't very good. And then you can say, well, was it this one person, or did everyone hate the appetizer? So, and again, same thing with your campsites and so on. But the interviews will lead you. They'll lead you in a direction, and they'll help you develop that. In the case I gave a moment ago, where we were going to tag the interviews on, is really we're tackling two different topics. So what we're asking them about are some things of how people camp and what they're doing on their trips and what gear they're using. And then the interviews are going to get into more of how they view the category overall, how they view where it's going, where, what the positives are, what the negatives are, and have a more of a conversation about that. So that's the difference between the order you do it. The order typically isn't that important, but again, if you're new to it, start off with your interviews.
Awesome. No, thanks for that example and kind of how to arrange things. I think that'll be really helpful for people kind of getting started. So, all right. And then obviously, as we go into these different techniques on information gathering, so how do you frame, or rather, how do you ask the right questions to get useful insights?
This is the area that is the most important. And it's something that is difficult for someone if they've never done it before. The way you ask the question will determine how someone answers. It's kind of like if you ask, I'll use the restaurant example, where if you're in a restaurant and at the end of the meal you come to the person and you say, "That was really good, wasn't it?" What you've done is you've already pushed that person to answer the way you want them to, which is to say, "Yeah, it was great." and they're also much less likely to give a negative. Some people anyway, but you see the point. So you want to avoid that. You want to be neutral as possible, and you want to, if you're using a scale, use standard scales. The great thing about some of the tools that are available is they have sample questions. So you can go to, say, a SurveyMonkey, and they'll have sample questions, how to ask the question and how to scale it, how to design the layout. Those are pretty important things, and that's why I think it's good to start small. And the most important thing to do, in my advice to anyone working on a questionnaire, is to put yourself in the position of the person answering the survey. If you were answering the survey, how would you feel about it? That, to me, is one of the key parts of questionnaire design. And for example, sometimes people feel like they need to force people into a side, so they'll use an unbalanced scale, positive or negative. I'm not a believer in that, by the way. I'm a believer in, if someone wants to be neutral, let them be neutral. Don't force them to be positive or negative. It's a false, it's kind of a false answer. So again, you want to give the person the opportunity to respond the way they should. That's why you should sit in their position and answer the questions. You'll go a long way doing it, using that approach, that mindset.
Awesome. So essentially, put yourself in their shoes, try to see, gather insights from their perspective without being biased one way or the other.
Right. Exactly.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, then as a follow-up question to that, how do you write unbiased, say, questions, rather kind of put us in your mindset, and then also how do you take customers through that process?
The way to write an unbiased question is to first, again, try not to use leading statements. If you want someone to say, for example, if you want to ask someone about their stay, and you want to know from a list of your amenities, which of the following, if any, were exceeded your expectations. So now we're saying exceeded because we want people to say, to say it is a positive question. But what we put in there were the two words, if any. So, and we're going to give them the option to say none of the above. So we're pushing them a little bit to the extreme here, but we're offering them an out, which is, did any of these things exceed your expectations? And they can always say no. So now in that case, it's a very simplistic case, but you're going to know a little bit more about them without really pushing them. And like I said, and saying, these exceed your expectations, didn't they? Or the same thing goes with almost anything. And alternatively, you can use a scale for each item. You can say, how well did the swimming pool meet your expectations? And this is an even more neutral way of doing it. You can have a 5-point scale. On the one end is 5, it exceeded, and on the other end, a 1 did not meet my expectations at all. So, and they can be neutral too. So now they have an out. They can say it did not meet my expectations or it exceeded, and they can also be neutral. That's a great way to keep it neutral. It's a little bit more work. The first way is a little simpler. It's a little easier for the person, but both are effective.
No, thank you. I think it'd be super helpful. And then kind of last question here, wrapping things up. So what is the biggest advantages of using, say, a market researcher to gather customer insights?
The whole idea behind that is, in whatever work you do, you should hire an expert, at least for advice. And if you are setting up the plumbing or electricity at your campground, you're probably not going to do it yourself, unless you are plumber or electrician. And you probably shouldn't if you are not. At a minimum, you should have a plumber or electrician come in and advise you on best approaches and best practices. And it's the same thing here. It's if you want it to be the most effective, then you should have an expert weigh in, someone who knows, and that could just be an advisory role to say, yep, it's good, or here's some thoughts that you should consider. You have to hire someone for the whole thing, but you can hire that person to review your stuff, to review your approach, and it would be money well spent to do. Again, just like with your plumber or electrician, it's typically better to do that, because if you do it wrong the first time, then it's going to be more to make up for it. It's like, and sometimes in market research, you don't know if you did it wrong, but your answers might not be accurate, and you may make a decision off those answers that are potentially misleading, and you don't want to do that. And because early in my career, I had someone ask me the question, it's like, are you willing to risk a couple $1 million on these results? It's a great question, because it was a big organization and it was a big decision. And so what you have to say to yourself is, did I do everything the right way? Did I dot my I's and cross my T's? Was my methodology solid? And if you can say yes to all those, it's like, yes, I can do that. But if you didn't, again, there's this risk, and that's what you want to. We're kind of in the business of minimizing risk, and that's the reason why you probably want an expert to be on board, at least for a little bit.
Definitely. Yeah, no, it sounds like, just overall, it's like you want to gather those customer insights, but you don't really just use market research for that clarity and that, to minimize risk.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. So perfect. Awesome. Well, that's all I had for today. So thanks everyone for joining us today for another episode of Data Lens. Don't forget to leave a comment or a question for next week's episode. Hit that like button if you like what you see. And as always, subscribe so you never miss out. Have a great day.
Bye.